Karen had always been the neighborhood busybody, sticking her nose where it didn't belong. But when she ripped out my prize-winning petunias, she crossed a line. I wasn't going to let her get away with destroying my property. Not this time. As I watched the police car pull up to her house, a feeling of twisted satisfaction washed over me. Karen was about to learn a hard lesson. You don't mess with a man and his garden. It had started off as such a beautiful spring day. I spent the morning tending to my flower beds, carefully pruning and watering each plant. My petunias were the pride of the neighborhood, vibrant splashes of color that drew admiring glances from passersby. I was just finishing up when I heard the all-too-familiar sound of Karen's voice carrying over the fence. Look at those weeds. Honestly, don't you people have any pride in your property? Gritting my teeth, I turned to face the intrusive woman. They're not weeds, Karen. These are my prize-winning petunias. Karen scoffed, her beady eyes narrowing as she surveyed my garden. Prize-winning? More like an eyesore. This whole yard is a disgrace. I felt my temper flare. If you have a problem with my garden, take it up with the neighborhood association. But leave me out of your self-appointed crusade to control everyone's property. Oh, I intend to, Karen snapped, her voice dripping with disdain. Mark my words, I'm going to make sure something is done about this horrendous mess. With that, she stormed off, leaving me fuming. I knew it was only a matter of time before she made good on her threat. Sure enough, 2 days later, I arrived home to find my carefully tended flower beds utterly destroyed. The vibrant petunias I had nurtured for months lay trampled and ripped from the soil. And standing in the middle of the carnage, a triumphant grin on her face, was Karen. What the hell do you think you're doing? I shouted, rushing over to assess the damage. Teaching you a lesson, Karen replied, her voice oozing satisfaction. I warned you to take care of this eyesore, but you refused to listen. Now you'll have to face the consequences. I stared at the ruined flowers, my heart sinking. These weren't just plants. They were the result of countless hours of hard work and dedication. And now, because of this spiteful woman, it was all gone. You're going to pay for this, Karen, I growled, barely containing my rage. You're going to pay dearly. Karen just laughed, turning on her heel and sauntering back to her own pristine yard. But I wasn't about to let her get away with this. I was going to make sure she learned a lesson she'd never forget. The next morning, I was on the phone with the police, filing a report for property damage. Karen's reckless destruction of my flowers was not only infuriating, but it was also a clear violation of local ordinances. If I could prove the monetary value of the damage, she could face hefty fines and potentially even criminal charges. As I recounted the details to the officer, my heart raced with a mixture of anger and determination. Those petunias were the result of years of careful cultivation. Their value is easily in the hundreds of dollars. And Karen did this deliberately, out of sheer spite and a desire to get back at me. The officer listened intently, jotting down notes. I see. This sounds like a clear-cut case of property damage. Do you have any evidence to support your claims? I nodded. As a matter of fact, I do. I have security camera footage that clearly shows Karen ripping up my flowers. And I can provide receipts for the plants and supplies I've used over the years. Excellent. That should give us the documentation we need to pursue this. The officer paused, a hint of empathy in his voice. I know how upsetting it must be to have your hard work destroyed like that. Don't worry, we're going to make sure Karen is held accountable. I let out a slow breath, some of the tension easing from my shoulders. Thank you, officer. I really appreciate you taking this seriously. Karen has been a constant thorn in my side, and I'm not going to let her get away with this. Well, you've certainly come to the right place. We'll get the ball rolling on this right away, the officer assured me. Just leave the rest to us. As I hung up the phone, a sense of relief washed over me. Finally, I had the authorities on my side. Karen was going to learn a hard lesson about messing with my property. And my pride. I'd make sure of that. I spent the rest of the day gathering the necessary evidence, meticulously documenting the value of the damaged plants and organizing the security camera footage. By the time the police arrived to serve Karen with a citation, I was more than ready to see this through. The look on Karen's face as the officer handed her the paperwork was priceless. Her jaw dropped, her eyes wide with shock and indignation. "What is the meaning of this?" she sputtered. "Ma'am, you're being cited for property damage," the officer explained calmly. "Your neighbor has provided evidence that you deliberately destroyed his flowers, which he valued at several $100s. You'll need to appear in court to answer for this violation." Karen's face flushed with anger. "This is an outrage. I'll fight this all the way." "I'd advise you to save your arguments for the judge," the officer replied, turning to leave. "In the meantime, I'd steer clear of your neighbor's yard if I were you." As the police car pulled away, I couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. The tables had turned, and now it was Karen's turn to face the consequences of her actions. I couldn't wait to see the look on her face when she had to pay for the damage she'd caused. The day of the court hearing arrived, and I sat in the gallery, my heart pounding with anticipation. As Karen was called to the stand, her face was a mask of barely contained fury. She fidgeted nervously, glaring at me from across the room. The judge wasted no time getting to the heart of the matter. "Ms. Jenkins, you've been cited for property damage in the amount of $500. How do you plead?" Karen shot up, her voice shrill. "Not guilty, Your Honor. This whole thing is a complete travesty. My neighbor is clearly trying to extort me with false accusations." I resisted the urge to roll my eyes. Typical Karen, always playing the victim. The judge fixed Karen with a stern look. "The evidence presented by your neighbor suggests otherwise. This security footage clearly shows you trespassing on his property and deliberately destroying his flowers." Karen's face flushed with indignation. "That footage is doctored. I would never do something like that. Those flowers were a blight on the entire neighborhood, and I was simply trying to improve the curb appeal." By destroying private property, the judge interjected, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "I'm afraid that's not how it works, Ms. Jenkins. You're facing a hefty fine, as well as the potential for criminal charges if this happens again." Karen opened her mouth to protest, but the judge silenced her with a raised hand. "I've heard enough. Based on the overwhelming evidence, I find you guilty of property damage. You're ordered to pay $500 in restitution to your neighbor, as well as an additional $200 in court fees. Failure to comply will result in further legal action." The gavel came down with a resounding thud, and Karen let out an indignant shriek. "This is outrageous. I won't pay a penny." "I'd strongly advise you to reconsider, Miss Jenkins," the judge warned. "The alternative is a day in jail for contempt of court." Karen's face contorted with fury, but she reluctantly nodded. "Fine. I'll pay the damn fine. But this isn't over." As she stormed out of the courtroom, I couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication. Karen had finally gotten the comeuppance she deserved. No more would she be able to bully and harass her neighbors without consequence. As I approached the clerk's office to collect my restitution check, a sense of triumph washed over me. The money would never make up for the time and effort I'd put into those flowers, but it was a small victory nonetheless. More importantly, Karen had been humbled, her sense of superiority shattered. She'd learned a valuable lesson of the consequences of her actions, and that, to me, was worth far more than any amount of money. Despite the court's ruling, Karen refused to let the matter drop. In the weeks that followed, she became a relentless thorn in my side, constantly finding new ways to retaliate. First, it was a barrage of angry phone calls and letters, accusing me of orchestrating some kind of neighborhood conspiracy against her. Then, she started filing frivolous complaints with the Homeowners Association, claiming my garden was a public nuisance. But the final straw came when I discovered that someone had deliberately tampered with my sprinkler system, causing significant damage to my remaining flowers. And when I checked the security footage, there was no mistaking the culprit. It was Karen, sneaking around in the dead of night like a common criminal. I immediately reported the incident to the police, providing them with the damning evidence. This time, Karen's antics had gone too far, and she was facing much more serious consequences. When the officers arrived at her doorstep, her smug expression quickly turned to one of panic. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, her voice quivering. "Miss Jenkins, you're under arrest for vandalism and criminal mischief," the officer stated, his tone firm. "We have video footage of you tampering with your neighbor's property, causing significant damage." Karen's face turned an alarming shade of red. "This is outrageous. You can't do this to me." "I'm afraid we can, ma'am," the officer replied, unfazed by her outburst. "You're looking at fines, probation, and potentially even jail time for these offenses. I'd suggest you cooperate and save yourself the hassle." As the officers cuffed Karen and led her to the waiting patrol car, I couldn't help but feel a sense of grim satisfaction. Finally, she was facing real consequences for her actions. No more empty threats or empty complaints. When the news spread through the neighborhood, the reaction was a mix of shock and relief. Many of my fellow residents had long been victims of Karen's bullying tactics, and they were thrilled to see her finally being held accountable. "It's about time someone put that woman in her place," my next-door neighbor, Mrs. Wilkins, remarked with a conspiratorial wink. "She's been making all our lives miserable for far too long." I nodded in agreement, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. With Karen behind bars, I could finally focus on rebuilding my garden and enjoying the tranquility of my own backyard. No more worrying about her schemes or her constant harassment. As I tended to my remaining flowers, a sense of renewed purpose filled me. This was more than just a victory for me. It was a victory for the entire neighborhood. And I was determined to make sure Karen learned her lesson, once and for all. The day of Karen's trial arrived, and the courtroom was packed with spectators, all eager to witness the downfall of the neighborhood's infamous busybody. As she was led in, handcuffed and sullen, I couldn't help but feel a surge of satisfaction. The prosecutor wasted no time laying out the case against her. "Your Honor, the evidence clearly shows that the defendant, Karen Jenkins, deliberately and maliciously damaged the property of her neighbor, Mr. Henderson. Not only did she rip out his prized flower garden, but she also sabotaged his sprinkler system, causing hundreds of dollars in repairs." Karen scowled, her eyes darting around the room. "This is all a conspiracy," she spat. "My neighbor is just trying to get back at me for trying to keep this neighborhood looking nice." The judge fixed her with a stern glare. "Ms. Jenkins, I'd advise you to let your attorney do the talking. These charges are quite serious, and your repeated actions suggest a pattern of harassment and criminal behavior." Karen's attorney stood, his brow furrowed. "Your Honor, my client maintains her innocence. The security footage is inconclusive, and there is no definitive proof that she was the one who vandalized Mr. Henderson's property." The prosecutor shook his head. "That's where you're wrong, Your Honor. We have testimony from multiple witnesses who saw Ms. Jenkins lurking around Mr. Henderson's yard in the days leading up to the incidents, and the forensic evidence found at the scene matches her DNA." Karen's face went pale, and she shot a panicked look at her lawyer. The noose was tightening, and she knew it. The judge let out a heavy sigh. "Given the preponderance of evidence, I have no choice but to find the defendant guilty on all charges. Ms. Jenkins, your actions have caused significant harm to your neighbor, not to mention the disruption you've brought to this community." Karen opened her mouth to protest, but the judge silenced her with a raised hand. "I'm not interested in your excuses. Your behavior has been nothing short of reprehensible, and you're going to face the consequences." He paused, his eyes narrowing. "For the destruction of property and the vandalism of Mr. Henderson's sprinkler system, I sentence you to 6 months in county jail, as well as 3 years of probation upon your release. And if I so much as hear a whisper of you causing any more trouble in this neighborhood, you can be sure I'll throw the book at you." The courtroom erupted into a chorus of murmurs and gasps, and Karen's face crumpled in disbelief. "No, this can't be happening," she wailed as the bailiffs moved in to escort her away. As I watched her being led out of the courtroom, a sense of relief and vindication washed over me. Karen had finally gotten what was coming to her, and I couldn't help but feel a twinge of pity for the once powerful neighborhood tyrant. But as I made my way home, I knew that the real victory was not in her punishment, but in the peace of mind that I had finally reclaimed. With Karen out of the picture, I could focus on rebuilding my garden and enjoying the tranquility of my own backyard once again. The months that followed Karen's sentencing were a welcome respite from the constant drama and harassment that had plagued my life. Without her constant meddling and interference, the neighborhood seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief. As I tended to my newly replanted flower beds, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and accomplishment. The vibrant petunias were a testament to my resilience, and a reminder that sometimes good deeds can prevail over malicious intent. But just as I was starting to settle back into a sense of normalcy, a familiar face appeared on my doorstep. It was Karen, her eyes red-rimmed and her expression contrite. "What are you doing here, Karen?" I asked, my guard immediately going up. She fidgeted nervously, her gaze fixed on the ground. I wanted to apologize for everything." I raised an eyebrow, skeptical of her sudden change of heart. "Apologize? After all the trouble you've caused me?" Karen nodded, her voice trembling. I know. What I did was unforgivable. I was just so consumed by my own sense of pride and righteousness that I couldn't see the harm I was causing." I crossed my arms over my chest, regarding her warily. "And what made you change your tune? Was it the 6 months in jail that finally knocked some sense into you?" She winced, her shoulders slumping. "Yes, actually. Being behind bars, away from my comfortable life, gave me a lot of time to reflect on my actions. I realized how petty and cruel I've been, not just to you, but to so many others in the neighborhood." I stared at her, unsure of how to respond. Part of me wanted to slam the door in her face and be done with her for good, but there was a sincerity in her voice that gave me pause. "Look, I'm not expecting you to forgive me," Karen continued, her eyes pleading. "But I wanted you to know that I'm truly sorry, and I'm committed to making amends however I can." I let out a long, weary sigh. "All right, Karen. I'll hear you out, but you're going to have to do a lot more than just apologize to make up for the hell you've put me through." She nodded, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "I understand, and I'm ready to do whatever it takes." As we sat down to discuss her plan for making amends, I couldn't help but feel a sense of cautious optimism. Could it be that Karen had genuinely had a change of heart? Or was this just another one of her manipulative schemes? Only time would tell. But for now, I was willing to at least give her a chance to prove herself. After all, the prospect of a peaceful, drama-free life was too tempting to ignore. Over the next few weeks, Karen made good on her promise to make amends. She started by organizing a neighborhood cleanup day, rallying all the residents to spruce up the common areas and gardens. It was a stark contrast to her previous complaints and criticisms, and I couldn't help but be impressed by her newfound sense of community spirit. Next, she approached me with an offer to help rebuild my flower beds, offering to cover the cost of the plants and materials. I was skeptical at first, but her genuine remorse and willingness to make things right slowly began to wear down my defenses. "Are you sure about this, Karen?" I asked, eyeing her warily. "After everything that's happened, I can't help but wonder if there's some ulterior motive at play." Karen shook her head, her expression earnest. "I know I've given you no reason to trust me, but I promise this is coming from a place of genuine regret and a desire to make things right. I was wrong, so terribly wrong, and I need to make amends." I studied her for a moment, searching for any hint of deception. But all I saw was a woman who seemed truly humbled and remorseful. Letting out a heavy sigh, I nodded. All right, Karen. I'm willing to give you a chance. With a grateful smile, she set to work, throwing herself into the task with a fervor I'd never seen before. Day after day, she labored alongside me, carefully tending to the soil and planting the new flowers. And as the vibrant petunias began to bloom, a sense of pride and accomplishment blossomed within me. But the real transformation came when Karen started engaging with the rest of the neighborhood, no longer as a critical busybody, but as a genuine, contributing member of the community. She volunteered at the local soup kitchen, organized a neighborhood watch program, and even spearheaded an initiative to plant more trees and green spaces throughout the area. The change in her was palpable, and the other residents couldn't help but take notice. Gone was the Karen they had once known, the one who had terrorized and bullied them. In her place was a woman who seemed genuinely committed to making amends and being a positive force in the community. As I watched her interacting with our neighbors, a sense of pride, and dare I say, even fondness, began to swell within me. Maybe, just maybe, Karen had truly turned a corner. And perhaps, with time and continued good behavior, I could even learn to forgive her. But as I admired the vibrant blooms of my renewed flower garden, I knew that the real victory was not in her punishment, but in the peace of mind that I had finally reclaimed. With Karen on the path to redemption, I could focus on enjoying the tranquility of my own backyard once again. As the months passed, Karen's transformation continued to astound both me and the rest of the neighborhood. She had become a tireless advocate for community improvement, organizing cleanup days, fundraisers, and outreach programs that brought everyone together in a spirit of unity and goodwill. Gone was the judgmental, meddlesome woman I had once known. In her place was a humble, compassionate individual who seemed genuinely driven to make amends for her past transgressions. One day, as I was tending to my now thriving flower garden, Karen approached me with a tentative smile. "Can I talk to you for a moment, Mr. Henderson?" I looked up, wiping the sweat from my brow. "Of course, Karen. What can I do for you?" She took a deep breath, her expression serious. "I wanted to thank you for giving me a second chance. I know I've put you through so much, and I can never truly make up for the pain and anguish I've caused you. But I hope that through my actions, I've at least begun to make amends." I nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. "You've certainly come a long way, Karen. I have to admit, I was skeptical at first, but I've been truly impressed by the change I've seen in you." Karen's eyes grew misty, and she reached out to gently touch my arm. "I owe it all to you, Mr. Henderson. If you hadn't had the courage to stand up to me, and if the courts hadn't held me accountable, I don't know that I would have ever found the strength to change." She paused, her gaze dropping to the vibrant petunias surrounding us. "And I'm so grateful that I was able to help restore your beautiful garden. It's a symbol of the hope and renewal that's blossomed in this community, thanks to you." I felt a lump forming in my throat, and I reached out to give her hand a gentle squeeze. "Thank you, Karen. I appreciate your words, and I'm glad to see that you found a new path. It's been a long and difficult journey, but I'm proud of the progress you've made." As we stood there, surrounded by the colorful blooms, I couldn't help but feel a sense of peace and contentment. The once bitter rivalry between us had been transformed into a budding friendship, and the neighborhood had become a better place for it. Karen had proven that even the most stubborn and misguided individuals can change, if given the chance. And as I looked around at the thriving community we had built together, I knew that the real victory was not in the punishment, but in the redemption.